First things I read was Trotsky's Revolution Betrayed, which had a very good analysis of the Soviet Union and where it was going, written in 1936. And some of the first pamphlets by Marx, which I read, I was very impressed with the scientific content of the analysis of capitalism and surplus value and all the concepts that were derived from that. Over the years, I've studied Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Trotsky, but also having needed to go back to study Hegel and see, his real compendium of dialectics, albeit from a idealist viewpoint. I mean, Hegel weren't the first person to come out with a dialectical philosophy, but he was by far the most systematic, and in fact, no one has written such a systematic study of dialectics ever since. Anyway, I mean, you can go back to Heraclitus in ancient Greece, but there's very little actually left of Heraclitus. There's only fragments, and most of his works were destroyed at a fire in Alexandria in Egypt way back. Don't remember when. Anyhow, so I've had to study Hegel as well. I've also read Kant, and I did a little study of the British empiricists because it's one of those things that you always combat, and the outlook of the ruling class within your own country. So in Britain, it tends to be towards empiricism, and in the US, it tends to be pragmatism or related to pragmatism in some way or other. And of course, there's all the other various outlooks which are related to religion and idealism in one form or another. Anyhow, so this conversation today is just an experimental one in order to, for me to clarify my own mind what dialectical materialism is all about, and also to introduce people, because many people haven't come across it in recent years. I mean, it was taught much more, go back a few decades, but in recent years, so many people have abandoned it. But in fact, what they've abandoned is the most advanced philosophy that humanity's ever produced, and gone back to earlier philosophies and earlier forms of thought. And one of the things that dialectics does explain very well is movement and change, and it really is the logic of revolution. So when Hegel came to write his Science of Logic, and all his works actually, Phenomenology of Spirit and Lectures on the History of Philosophy, he was actually propelled forward, if you like, by the French Revolution and what had happened during the French Revolution. It was a period of upheaval. There was the philosophical enlightenment in the 18th century, and you had the American Revolution, War of Independence, and then you had the French Revolution. So it was a period of turmoil in a world which was much smaller in population than ours is today. But anyhow, so it was, actual revolutionary movements in the world itself that actually pushed forward thought. But of course, Hegel didn't come out of nowhere. His actual philosophy was a development of German philosophy that primarily in many ways started from Kant and then moved on to Fichte and then to Schelling. And Schelling really, when faced with the contradictions that Hegel brought out, he decided that he would move towards art. But Hegel stuck with logic, and he expressed the contradictions in a logical way. And both Marx and Engels studied Hegel when they were young, and Marx also studied materialist philosophers like Democritus and Epicurus, and he wrote his doctoral dissertation on those. But above all, both Marx and Engels studied Feuerbach, who'd previously studied Hegel, but he came out with a materialist philosophy. He didn't really incorporate much of Hegel into his philosophy, and his philosophy was somewhat vague. In the thing really to read in relation to Feuerbach is Marx's thesis on Feuerbach, where he was actually criticising and breaking from Feuerbach. But at one time, both Marx and Engels were very much under the influence of Feuerbach, of course. So when they, although they wrote criticisms of Feuerbach, and also they had a long polemic against the young Hegelians, but the people who continued Hegel's philosophy, but who were not critical of the Hegelian philosophy like Marx and Engels were, and hadn't been influenced by Feuerbach, and didn't actually study Hegel from a materialist standpoint, which is what Marx and Engels came to do. So their dialectical materialism was the opposite of Hegel, that it was a materialist dialectics as opposed to an idealist dialectics. Anyhow, so and then of course when Lenin studied Marx and Engels' works, he also decided that he would need to go back to Hegel to make a thorough study of Hegel's works, because neither Marx nor Engels wrote a comprehensive critique of Hegel in detail, or very long philosophical works on Hegel, because for Marx, when the last of his thesis on Feuerbach was that the philosophers had interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, was to change it, and actually for Marx it was necessary to actually study political economy in order to change the world, and that is what he did. He threw himself into a study of political economy, which resulted in Capital, and of course also he was involved in the revolution sweeping Europe in 1848. So he was moved not out of the field of theory, but to a more practical form of theory in terms of political economy and politics itself. So when he said the philosophers have only interpreted the world, the point, however, is to change it, he didn't mean he would just go out with a few bricks or whatever. He meant he was going to analyze capitalism practically and study its empirical laws and empirical works. So I was also talking about Lenin. So he decided that he would need to do a more thorough study of Hegel, because Marx and Engels had never written this down, just their early works. So Lenin made a thorough study of Hegel and other philosophers prior to Hegel, people like Aristotle and other philosophers, and Feuerbach, and the notebooks that he wrote, which were volume 38 of his collected works, were never actually published in his lifetime, and I don't think he really wanted to be published, but they're actually the documents that in there really represent the highest development of philosophy, that humanity has produced, as far as I'm concerned. This is my opinion, that I've read Soviet philosophers who followed Lenin after Lenin died, and including Ivald Ilyenkov, who I think was pretty much the best of the Soviet philosophers, but none of them really came close to Lenin in his understanding of dialectics and dialectical materialism. And that's why volume 38, although is only notes and notes on Hegel, most of them, well, not all of them, but that's why it's such an important document even today, and it's well worth revering and going back on.